The worst part wasn't being kicked out. It was realizing I'd been used for years and I never even saw it coming. And when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to destroy me. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your story too, because some storms you don't survive. You outgrow them. I pulled into the cracked driveway, the sun already dipping below the horizon. Casting the small town of Ridgeway, Ohio in a heavy blue dusk, the air carried that early bite of fall where the chill sneaks under your jacket collar and makes you fold into yourself. I reached across the passenger seat for the small cake box. Hello, I'm Avin. I thought family meant home security, love. Instead, on my 30th birthday, my parents handed me a packed suitcase and a silent eviction. No thank you. No goodbye. Just a cold command. You're too old to freeload. I paid their bills. I covered their debts. I kept the lights on. And somehow I was still disposable. Years ago, I accepted that my parents, Colin and Vera, no longer celebrated anything for me. Yet, a peculiar sterile silence hung in the air that night, thicker than usual. The kitchen lights hummed above, casting an unforgiving, pale glow over everything. Dinner was already served: meatloaf, canned green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. I hadn't even removed my coat when Cullen barked from the head of the table. "You're late?" I quietly placed the cake on the counter, the bag crinkling louder than I'd intended. "Worked late," I replied, my voice flat and measured, offering no apology. Had to finish up some reports. The only thing I'd bothered to get for myself today. $20 vanilla frosting. "Happy birthday," even written crookedly in red icing because I hadn't wanted to correct the tired teenager behind the counter. As I stepped inside, the house felt off. It wasn't that I expected a surprise party or even a half-hearted card. Vera didn't say a word, just fussed with her fork, never looking up. Cullen grunted, pouring himself another inch of whiskey into his chipped glass. I hung my coat on the hook and sat down, feeling the tension spiderweb across the room. Dinner started, knives scraping against plates. The clink of glasses, the occasional forced cough. The sound shot straight up my spine. He leaned back, staring at me like he was seeing something rotten. "You're too old to be freeloading." His voice was cold, rehearsed. "It's time you left for a second." The words floated in the air. Unreal. I blinked at him, then glanced at Vera, hoping for some sort of contradiction, some sign. No happy birthday, no acknowledgement, just the mechanical rhythm of chewing and swallowing. I lifted my fork, pushing a sad clump of potatoes around my plate. I should have known something was coming. Cullen wasn't the type to simmer quietly for long. Halfway through his plate, he slammed his fork down hard enough that Vera jumped in her chair. They'd waited for today of all days to deliver the blow. My birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. I pushed my plate away. The meatloaf, the cake in the bag, the weight in the room. It all sat in my stomach like a brick. I stood up slowly, feeling their eyes follow me, expecting a scene maybe. This was a drunken rant. She kept her eyes down, lips pressed together so tightly they looked bloodless. "I pay the internet bill," I said carefully. "The electricity, half the mortgage, groceries." My voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. Just facts laid bare on the table between us. Cullen laughed, a short, sharp bark that felt like a slap. "Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a lifetime stay." Princess, the nickname he used to call me when I was little, climbing into his lap with scraped knees and lopsided pigtails. Now it was twisted, weaponized. I swallowed back whatever cracked in my chest. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was planned, pressy. I walked toward the stairs, pausing just briefly by the counter where the cake still sat in its bag. The plastic candle had stretched from the weight digging into the soft foam of the box. One candle was missing. The stupid little box was probably jostled in the car, but it felt symbolic anyway. One candle missing, one person missing, one family missing. I carried the cake upstairs, not daring to look back. Each loud, accusing creak of the steps resonated with finality. Closing my bedroom door, I leaned against it, the hollow thud echoing the emptiness within me. This house, I realized, had never truly been mine. For a long moment, I sat on the bed, my gaze fixed on the packed bags. Tears begging, some pathetic display that would justify their cruelty. Instead, I nodded just once, Sharp, final. Got it, I said. Cullen smirked like he'd scored some invisible point. Vera kept her head down, shame pooling in the slumped curve of her shoulders, but not enough to make her speak, not enough to stop me from becoming disposable. I had been too afraid to finish packing. Deep down, over the past few weeks, I had sensed this moment approaching. Perhaps not today, nor with such cruelty, but inevitably. I had believed I had more time, that I could fix things if I just kept helping. I peeled off my jacket, folding it neatly over the suitcase. My hands were steady, mechanical, not because the hurt was absent, but because I was finally done. They forfeited everything I ever gave without asking for anything. In return, outside my window, the wind picked up, rattling the last stubborn leaves off the maples lining the street. Another reminder that winter was coming fast, and I wouldn't be here when it hit. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. As I moved around the room gathering a few essentials, my mind started clicking through logistics like clockwork. Cancel autopay for the utilities. Transfer my checks to my own account, not the joint one. My mother insisted I keep for emergencies. Find a storage unit until I figured out the rest. They didn't just kick me out tonight. Same brown hair pulled into a loose bun, same tired green eyes, but something was different. A line had been crossed. A line I couldn't uncross even if I wanted to. I walked back to the bed, sitting down heavily. The cake sat on my nightstand, now looking absurdly small. I hadn't even thought to buy candles. Happy birthday, even. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence in my room pressing against me like a second skin. My suitcase was half packed, gaping, open, as if mocking my indecision outside. The wind whispered against the old windows, rattling loose panes that no one had ever bothered to fix. The whole house seemed to sigh under its own neglect, and I suddenly saw it for what it truly was. Not that anyone would have been here to sing. The smell of cheap frosting filled the room, nauseatingly sweet. I stared at the box, the lonely smear of icing, visible through the plastic window. Then, without thinking, I pushed it off the nightstand. It fell with a soft thud cake and cardboard crumpling against the worn carpet. Its worn handle was slick from years of use. It wasn't just clothes that weighed down its contents. It was years of concealing their failures, mending their broken pieces while my own were left to decay. Memories rushed forward like a bitter tide, bringing back the time Cullen cracked a molar during one of his benders. He couldn't afford the surgery, not with the late mortgage notices piling up on the kitchen counter. So I dipped into my savings, the fund I had quietly built for my own place, and paid for it in cash. No thank you. No acknowledgement, just a grunt when he got back from the dentist, drooling and cursing the whole way inside. This wasn't a home, but a place where I was tolerated until I became expendable. My eyes fell upon the cake, now a ridiculous smashed mess on the carpet, its smeared frosting a childish hope dissolving into the beige fibers. I tore my gaze away, fixing it instead on the dull gray suitcase. The sadness was still there, but colder. Now calcifying into something harder to break. The floor creaked. As I stood grabbing my phone from the nightstand, my feet carried me downstairs. Stepped soft out of habit in the living room. The glow of the television painted my parents in an eerie blue light. Cullen lounged in his recliner, or the winter. Vera's tires baldly skidded off the road. She called me in a panic, stranded outside town. I skipped work, bought her a whole new set, and even paid for the tow. She patted my hand once, saying, "You're a good girl." Before handing me the repair bill she expected me to cover too. When the roof started leaking last spring, it was me up on the ladder hammering shingles in the pouring rain. Cullen sat inside with a beer, shouting about how you can't trust these contractors nowadays. While his daughter, who he called a freeloader, saved the damn house from collapsing. None of it mattered. None of it earned me a seat at their table. Tonight, I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until bursts of light flashed behind my lids. Beer in hand, Vera perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, eyes glassy and distant. They looked fine, as if nothing had happened, as if tonight had been just another Wednesday where they shoved food into their mouths and pretended the world owed them something. I stood there waiting. Maybe a part of me still hoped, still stupidly clung to the idea that Vera would glance over and realize that Cullen would sober up and remember who had kept the lights on when the checks bounced. But hope is a dangerous thing. And tonight it was dead. Cullen noticed me first. His lip curled in a sneer as he raised his beer. And lazily, "Don't forget to turn off the lights when you leave." He slurred, "You're not paying for them anymore." The words hit harder than any slap could have. They weren't just kicking me out. They were erasing every sacrifice, every unspoken debt I didn't answer. I didn't scream or cry or beg. Instead, I let the silence swallow the last piece of me that had ever needed their approval. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, the weight in my chest heavier than any suitcase. I opened my laptop, and the screen illuminated the room with a soft, sterile glow. My fingers moved instinctively, a result of years of managing online payments. I quickly accessed all my utility accounts: electricity, water, and gas, all registered under my name. When I reached my room, I closed the door softly, pressing my palm against the wood, as if sealing off the part of me that had once believed blood meant loyalty for a long minute. I just stood there, breathing in the musty smell of old carpet and stale memories. Then, with a steady hand, I pulled my laptop from under the bed and set it on the nightstand if they thought they could toss me aside and keep living off the crumbs I left behind. My finger hovered over the cancel button on the utilities portal, trembling momentarily before I pressed down firmly. The electric bill, then the water, then the gas. Each was canceled. With every click, it felt as though I was severing an invisible cord, freeing myself from a house where affection was conditional and betrayal lingered in silence. Next came the bank account, the one my mother insisted we keep joint for emergencies. I moved my remaining funds into a private account I had set up months ago, back when a tiny voice inside me warned that this day would come, transfer complete. The cable and internet accounts were next services they used daily, mindlessly, never realizing it was my name on the bills, my paychecks funding their binge-watching marathons and endless scrolling. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click was a small reclamation of power they thought I didn't have. I paused briefly over the auto insurance Cullen's truck, Vera's battered Camry, both covered under my plan to save them a few $100 a month. I could almost hear Vera's voice from last year, sweet and sticky, saying, "You're so good with money, honey. It just makes sense." Sure it did. For them, I clicked remove vehicle on each one, heart hammering in my chest. Not with fear, but with a grim kind of satisfaction. When the last account was severed, I closed the laptop with a soft snap. It was nearly midnight, and the house had fallen into a deceptively peaceful silence below my window. The oak trees rustled quietly in the late autumn wind, carrying with it the brittle scent of dried leaves and the first whispers of the coming winter. For a moment, I sat still, feeling the ache seep into my bones. The silence in the room felt different now. Lighter, sharper. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about balance. They wanted me gone, fine, but they would finally feel what it meant to lose the daughter who had held their fragile little world together with invisible thread downstairs. The TV kept blaring a sitcom, laugh track, echoing up the staircase. I wondered how long it would take before the lights flickered out, before the heater sputtered its last gasp, before reality crept into their little bubble of self-righteousness. I wasn't sticking around to find out tomorrow. I would be gone. But tonight, I started pulling the first bricks from the foundation they had so carelessly built on my back. The glow of the laptop screen dimmed slightly as I leaned back, my fingers poised above the keyboard. Dad forgot to pay one winter, and we went 2 days without heat. My password slipped easily into the login screen. Within seconds, I navigated to the payment section. Heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in years. Remove payment method. Confirmation flashed across the screen. I clicked submit without hesitation. I wasn't just tired from the physical weight of the day. I was exhausted from years of carrying responsibilities that were never acknowledged. But exhaustion was a luxury I couldn't afford. Tonight, I cracked my knuckles, softly exhaled, and focused. First up was the electricity bill. I had been the primary account holder ever since. Next was the water bill. Same story. I canceled the autopay, deleting my debit information with a grim sort of satisfaction. I wasn't just leaving. I was extracting myself surgically, methodically, from every vein that kept this household alive. Netflix was next. I almost laughed seeing the profile names: dads, moms, even one labeled family movie night. Late nights, staying at the office, 2 extra hours to scrape enough overtime together to cover a surprise heating bill. The vacations I canceled so Vera could replace her alternator. The birthdays I skipped celebrating because there was always something more important they needed from me. Clenched the pen tighter, forcing my hand to steady. A joke, considering we hadn't had one in nearly a decade. Delete account, internet service, gone. Cell phone plan, add-ons, gone. My personal Amazon Prime account, disconnected from the shared household address. Each click wasn't vengeance, it was survival. It was truth manifesting through action. After an hour, I pushed the laptop slightly aside and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the nightstand drawer. I wrote down everything I had disconnected, everything that would stop operating. Once the morning sun crawled across the siding of this crumbling house, I needed to see it in ink, the final tally of everything they had taken for granted. As I scribbled the last item, a wave of old unwanted memories washed over me. This wasn't about punishing them, it was about refusing to be their safety net any longer. Scrolling through my bank app, I found the emergency savings account I had set up years ago. Back then, I naively thought it was wise, something to ensure our family never had to experience another winter without heat, or another summer without electricity. I temporarily froze the account, which was primarily in my name, but accessible to them, because family after all. This meant no withdrawals or transfers. It would take them weeks of paperwork and signatures to even begin freezing it themselves. And by then, I'd be long gone. As the confirmation screen blinked, the tight knot in my chest finally began to loosen. I had given them everything: money, time, loyalty, chances. Tonight, for the first time, I chose myself. A new email notification popped up, a quick message from Tyler, my cousin, with a meme of a cartoon dog in a burning room saying, "This is fine." I imagined Vera sitting on the couch, clutching her glass of wine, watching reruns. Like nothing was about to change. The heater clicked on a deep mechanical groan, rumbling through the floorboards, probably the last cozy night they would enjoy. For a while, I double-checked every cancellation, every freeze, every disconnection scheduled to activate at sunrise. No words, just that I snorted, a humorless laugh. Tyler, for all his faults, always knew when something was wrong. I debated replying, but decided against it. I didn't want to drag him into this. He was family by blood, but he wasn't part of this decay. Some bridges needed to burn without witnesses. Instead, I opened a blank email draft, typing out a subject line in mechanical strokes. "You asked me to leave now, so has my support." I stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers hovered over the send button, heart thudding once, twice. And then I closed the tab. They didn't deserve an explanation. They deserved the silence they had gifted me. Tonight, the clock on my laptop flicked over to 1:57 a.m. The house creaked and settled, and somewhere downstairs, a bottle clinked against the side of the sink. They would feel it. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply felt empty. But it was the kind of emptiness that promised something better, would fill it in time. At 2:01 a.m., I closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in my chair, staring at the shadows dancing across my ceiling. My bag was ready. My car, parked 2 blocks away to avoid suspicion, was already packed with essentials. Neat, clean, irreversible. By tomorrow, when Cullen flipped on the light switch or tried to microwave his coffee, there would be no electricity. When Vera went to pay for her morning groceries using the joint card, it would be declined. When the internet cut out mid-episode of whatever drama she was binge-watching, they would know. Tomorrow, I would leave this town behind, this crumbling shell of obligation and resentment. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to a life without the daughter they never thought twice about. Morning light barely seeped through the cheap blinds of Nora's apartment. When my phone buzzed angrily against the nightstand groggy, I pulled the covers tighter around me, hoping irrationally that it was a wrong number, but a glance at the screen shattered that hope. I tapped through Tyler's text first. It was blunt, straight to the point, like he always was. Internet's down, no lights. Dad's furious. Mom crying. I let the phone fall onto the mattress beside me and stared at the cracked ceiling above. It had begun, and I wasn't there to fix it. Not this time. A notification chimed this time. A voicemail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I played it on speaker while I pulled on a sweater. Vera's voice soft and shaking even. Honey, there must be some mistake. You wouldn't just leave us like this. Please call me. We can fix whatever's wrong. We're family. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words hang in the stale air. 12 missed calls. Vera Cullen. A few unfamiliar numbers, probably neighbors or extended family. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I just stared at the list, feeling a complicated knot of emotions tightened in my chest. A twinge of guilt tried to surface. I shoved it down. They made their choice, rolling onto my back. Funny how quickly Freeloader turned back into family when the Wi-Fi stopped working. Another ding, a text from Cullen. You'll regret turning your back on your family. No warmth there. No confusion. Just rage. I silenced the phone, turned it face down on the nightstand. Nora shuffled into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee, wearing an oversized hoodie and sleek tousled hair. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me one of the mugs and sat on the floor next to the bed after a long sip. She said, "You look like someone just told you your winning lottery ticket expired." I huffed a humorless laugh. "They're panicking," I said, simply. Nora leaned her head against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. "Good," she said, voice calm. "Sometimes it's not betrayal to save yourself. It's survival." We sat there for a while, listening to the faint sounds of a garbage truck rumbling down the street. Later that afternoon, I headed with Nora to a community event at the local church. A simple autumn festival with pies and pumpkins and booths selling homemade candles. Small town life in all its predictable charm. I stayed near the edges, minding my own business, but it didn't take long for whispers to reach my ears. Cullen was there. He stood near the apple bobbing booth, voice raised just enough to gather attention. I didn't have to get close to hear him. My daughter abandoned us. He barked after everything we sacrificed for her kids these days. No loyalty, no gratitude. Heads turned. Some nodded sympathetically, but others exchanged skeptical glances. It wasn't the first time Cullen had aired dirty laundry in public, and people remembered things. Nora nudged me gently. "Don't she?" murmured. I hadn't realized I had started walking toward him. I stopped, forced myself to breathe, let him rant, let him play the victim. I didn't owe them an audience. Instead, I wandered past the booths, letting snippets of conversations drift by. Didn't her daughter pay for their bills for years? Isn't that the one who stayed home to help when the mom got sick? Funny how now she's suddenly the villain. The tide was turning slowly, like an invisible current, pulling away from my parents' control. Cullen and Vera could spin their stories, but real cracks were starting to show, and the town had a long memory. Later that evening, back at Nora's place, I scrolled through updates. As twilight deepened, painting the familiar rooftops with long purple shadows, I watched from Nora's window as the town not far from here settled into night. The house, once a drain on my patience and love, now flickered into darkness. This time, I didn't rush to save it. Friends had texted me photos of the house, the porch, light out, uncollected newspapers piling up a note that Cullen had gotten into a shouting match with the electric company rep in front of the neighbors. They weren't ashamed of how they treated me. They were only ashamed. They couldn't hide it anymore. With the house, a part of me also slipped into darkness. Yet, as night gave way to morning, the world outside continued its rhythm. People went to work. Dogs barked at the mailman. Kids laughed at the school bus stop. Life didn't pause just because mine had been cracked open. 3 days blurred into a haze of trying to build a new normal. I buried myself in tasks, organizing the documents scattered on Nora's kitchen table, scrubbing down the bathroom. We shared, tweaking my resume for the 100th time. Anything to stay busy, anything to keep from thinking about them. But the mind is a stubborn thing. It was mid-morning when my phone buzzed again. That familiar vibration that sent my heart skittering against my ribs. I almost didn't check it. Almost the text was from Vera. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. Dad's health is failing. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. I stood in the center of the small living room, the phone heavy in my hand, my stomach twisting into hard knots. The guilt came fast and sharp, carving into me like it had been, waiting just below the surface. I sank onto the worn couch, reading the words again and again, until they blurred images flashed uninvited birthday parties with homemade cakes, late-night talks in the living room, laughter over burnt Thanksgiving, turkeys, childhood memories that didn't match the reality of recent years, but felt painfully real in this moment. What if they really were suffering? What if I was punishing them too harshly? The guilt slithered deeper as the day dragged on. It didn't stop with Vera's message. The calls started trickling in. Distant relatives I barely spoke to suddenly felt entitled to an opinion. You know, your father's heart isn't strong. Aunt Marcy's voice cooed from one voicemail. Families fight. Sure, but cutting them off like this, it's cruel. Think about your mother. Uncle Phil's text insisted she's fragile. This could kill her. Each message hammered another crack into my resolve. Maybe I was heartless. Maybe I was the villain in this story. Maybe my phone buzzed again. A text from Tyler. Short, brutal dad told mom to fake chest pains next. If guilt-tripping you doesn't work. I stared at the screen. The weight of that simple sentence, knocking the air out of my lungs. So that was the plan. Not mending, not understanding, not accountability. Just another con. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could do for them. Numb. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and curled into myself on the couch. The sun shifted across the floor, tracing slow golden fingers across Nora's second-hand rug. As the hours slipped by, I let the weight of everything press down, not resisting at this time. The years of bending over backward, the quiet sacrifices, the endless giving, hoping it would be enough to earn a seat at a table that was never truly mine. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, sharper. I didn't move until Nora came home from her shift at the clinic, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the hardwood. And with it, new battles. I wasn't naive enough to think cutting them off would end the war, but tonight I had won a small one. When I put the phone down, after blocking every number tied to them, I expected chaos to fall away from my life, like a heavy coat shrugged from my shoulders. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "You okay?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. I nodded once slowly because I finally was after she disappeared into the kitchen. I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts one by one. Colin, Vera, Aunt Marcy, Uncle Phil. Every cousin and distant relation who had called to scold, but never once called to ask how I was holding up one by one. I hit delete. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I simply erased. When I was done, I opened my settings and blocked every number tied to that house, that life, that false sense of belonging. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of mercy for myself. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat back, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years tomorrow would come. I was sipping weak coffee from one of Nora's chipped mugs when my phone buzzed across the table. At first, I thought it was another job, rejection. Instead, it was a message from Carrie, an old coworker. "Hey, you seen what your dad posted? Curious." I tapped the link there. It was splattered across the local town's Facebook group, like a festering wound. Collins. The first few days slipped by uneventfully. I filled my time helping Nora reorganize her apartment, applying for positions in nearby towns, even cooking dinner for us. Small acts of reclaiming normalcy. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had outrun the wreckage. They tried to leave in my heart. Then it started. It was a Thursday morning, just as the fall chill began creeping through the windows. Words burned into my screen. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Some turn into snakes. After everything we sacrificed, our daughter left us sick, starving, abandoned. Pray for us. The post already had over 100 comments. Some offered prayers. Others, people I barely knew, hurled judgment like stones. Ungrateful brat. One read, parents give you life and you spit on them. Another sneered for a second. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. Nora glanced over from the kitchen counter, her brows pulling together bad. I could only nod, pressing the phone screen to my chest like it might stop the ache rising in me. I stared at her, her words sinking deeper than I cared to admit. Are you really going to let them? She pressed. No, not this time. I powered off my phone and reached for the folder I kept in the drawer. It held my insurance, my truth, a meticulously kept record. Years of receipts, screenshots, emails, and bank statements documented the thousands of dollars I'd funneled into that house, into those people, without ever once demanding gratitude. By noon, the wildfire raged. My inbox overflowed with warnings from friends, neighbors, distant cousins, and even former teachers, all commenting on their long-held suspicions about that girl. Nora, with fierce calm, sat opposite me. They're writing your story for you, she stated. Electric bills in my name. Mortgage payments from my account. Repairs funded by my overtime shifts. They had forgotten the cost because they had never paid it. But I hadn't. I spent the next few hours scanning documents, organizing files. Every receipt was a memory, and every memory was a blade cutting away. Because I knew something Cullen and Vera hadn't counted on, I wasn't rushing into battle with blind anger. I wasn't swinging wildly like a wounded animal. I was patient. Now strategic. The small town we lived in thrived on gossip. It also crumbled fast when truth surfaced. All I had to do was wait for the right crack in their facade. Whatever pity I might have felt by evening, I had built an arsenal, a neat, unassailable fortress of evidence. Nora peeked into the room, her voice low. You gonna post it? I looked up from the laptop, shaking my head. Not yet. I said, let them talk a little more. Let them show everyone who they really are. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. He was right in a way I had been grateful. Grateful even when they starved me emotionally, drained me financially, erased me as a person. But not anymore. By the time I drifted off to sleep, I wasn't just surviving their lies anymore. I was about to bury them with the truth. The moment when their lies grew too bloated to hold themselves up. And when that moment came, I wouldn't have to say much, just the truth. That night, as Nora and I ate leftover spaghetti on the couch, she raised her fork toward me like a toast to survival, she said. I smiled faintly, lifting my own fork to never apologizing for saving yourself later. Lying awake in the quiet of the spare bedroom, I replayed Cullen's words in my head. They thought I'd never dare say the decision had been made. There was no turning back. I sat at the small dining table in Nora's apartment, laptop, open heart hammering in my chest, but hands steady. The air smelled of leftover coffee and rain from the night before. Ordinary scents clashing against the extraordinary moment about to unfold. They weren't looking, and they lost the person who kept things going. I hit post, and for a moment silence descended, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge. Then my phone began to buzz. It started slowly. A few likes, some comments of shock, and private messages from old school friends wondering why I had stayed so long. Carefully, I uploaded the thread. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical first screenshots of my years of utility payments, power, water, internet, each bearing my name, each dated clearly. Then came the bank statements showing mortgage payments pulled monthly from my account, even when Cullen's paycheck had been enough to cover them. I included old emails between me and the landlord messages, verifying I had funded repairs that had kept the house standing through harsh Ohio winters. Finally, I laid out a brief timeline, the years I sacrificed vacations, birthday celebrations, even simple self-care to keep a roof over their heads. And then the ending, a simple statement: when they asked me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter. The momentum then shifted dramatically, like a dam breaking. Dozens of shares and hundreds of comments flooded in. Neighbors, former teachers, and even people I barely remembered began to chime in. One neighbor posted, "I remember seeing her shoveling their driveway alone when she was 16 while her parents yelled from the porch." Another added, "Cullen always bragged about how he never paid a cent for household bills." Once Avon got her job, stories poured out, like hidden wounds finally surfacing. It turned out people had seen more than they ever let on. They just hadn't spoken until someone dared to name the truth out loud. Meanwhile, Cullen and Vera panicked. First, Cullen tried to counterattack. He posted a brittle, furious status. "We all have misunderstandings in families. My daughter exaggerates things for sympathy." Sad, really? It backfired instantly underneath. Commenters weren't buying it anymore. "Funny how you never posted about her paying your bills until now. Someone snared you. Don't look too sick," cashing her checks. Another added, brutal in its honesty. Then Vera tried a different tactic. Pity. Voicemail after voicemail filled my inbox. "Evan, please. Your father isn't... Well, I didn't know he was going to post that. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Please take it down before people think badly of us." The old brass band tuned up on the stage by the courthouse steps. I felt eyes on me the second I arrived. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was something softer, sadder, a kind of collective realization. I passed by Mrs. Langford, my old elementary teacher. She gave me a nod and a small, sad smile. Mr. Collins, from the hardware store, tipped his cap silently. There was a time when that pleading tone would have shattered me. Not anymore. I knew now it wasn't about regret. It was about reputation. That afternoon, Nora and I walked down to the fall festival at the town square. The crisp air smelled of caramel apples and hay children squealed from the bounce houses. Finally, as Nora and I neared the pumpkin carving station, a woman I barely knew, one of Vera's old church friends, stepped forward. Her hand was gentle as she touched my shoulder. "You deserved better, sweetheart," she said quietly. We all knew. We were just too afraid to say it. Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I nodded, murmuring a soft thank you that seemed too small for the weight it carried. Standing there in the heart of the community where I had once been invisible, I realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. The shame was never mine. It had been theirs all along as the afternoon faded into evening. The square lit up with strings of fairy lights, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. Children laughed, music played, and for once I didn't feel like an outsider lurking at the edges. I belonged to myself. Now, later that night, as fireworks exploded over the courthouse, lawn in bursts of red and gold, I stood still, head tilted back. A polite, almost embarrassed knock sounded at the door. Nora peered over her coffee mug, her brow furrowed, as I crossed the small living room. Opening the door, I found a uniformed officer holding a large manila envelope. "Ms. Evan Marin?" he asked, his voice neutral. Watching the sky tear itself open in color, a soft voice whispered inside me. Sometimes the brightest displays come only after the darkest storms. And this time I wasn't running from the wreckage. I was rising from it. The smell of burnt leaves drifted through the air as I leaned against the frame of Nora's apartment window, watching the small town settle into another cool autumn evening. Life outside looked untouched, unaware that mine was teetering on the edge of yet another battlefront. 2 days had passed since I posted the truth. I had almost let myself believe it was over, that maybe silence would be the final word between us. A knot already forming in my stomach, I answered, "Yes." He handed over the envelope. "You've been served. Civil suit. Any questions?" The contacts listed inside. I thanked him mechanically, closing the door with a soft click. I stared down at the envelope as if it might bite, knowing without opening it who it was from. Unbelievable. They're trying to destroy you because you walked away for a brief moment. That old, familiar guilt flared, hot and sharp, like a reopened wound. The same voice that had haunted me since childhood whispered, "Maybe you're making too much of this. Maybe you should have just stayed quiet." But that voice had lost its power. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the papers inside. Cullen had filed a lawsuit against me. The charges were laughable if they hadn't been so cruel. Theft, emotional elder abuse, financial abandonment. It was a tantrum, dressed up in legalese. Nora read over my shoulder, muttering. Instead of spiraling, I inhaled, slowly feeling the solid ground of truth beneath my feet. Not this time, I said aloud. Standing up, I'm done. Apologizing for saving myself. By noon, I was on the phone with a legal aid office in Columbus. I explained everything methodically, calmly, forwarded them the proof. I had already compiled every payment, every receipt, every documented act of support. They listened, asked careful questions, then assured me they would help draft a countersuit if needed. You have a strong case, the paralegal said, and honestly, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life back. That afternoon, I took their advice and filed my own formal complaints, this time outlining years of financial manipulation under emotional coercion, elder abuse. It turned out went both ways. When adult children were weaponized for labor and money under the threat of guilt, the backlash was swift. Vera called first her voice, trembling with manufactured grief. Then, please, you're tearing this family apart. We only wanted what was best for you. You're overreacting. You know your father's not well. I didn't respond. An hour later, Cullen's text came in a final poison dart. You think you won? Family always gets the last word. I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring slightly as anger and pity warred inside me. Then I opened the small drawer beside my bed. Tucked in the corner, wrapped carefully in a tissue, was the tiny plastic cake topper I'd bought myself on my last birthday. The birthday they had turned into an eviction party, a single candle, a broken memory. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the absurdity of how much hope had once been packed into such a small, meaningless object. Family isn't who you're born to, I whispered into the quiet room. It's who treats you like you matter. Inside, Cullen sat rigidly at a battered wooden table, with Vera beside him, her hands twisting the strap of her handbag. They appeared smaller than I remembered, angrier, weaker. An officer calmly explained that if they pursued the false charges, they could be countersued for defamation and financial abuse. 2 days later, legal papers in hand, I stood outside the police station, accompanied by a volunteer advocate from the aid office. The building, gray and square, was no more imposing than a post office. Yet the weight of its meaning settled heavily on my shoulders. Charges that could stick with the evidence. I held. Cullen's face turned an alarming shade of red. He shoved his chair back, rattling it against the floor. This is a witch hunt. He snapped at the officer. She's manipulating everyone. No one responded. Vera crumbled into her seat, sobbing so loudly. It echoed off the cinder block walls. The courthouse looming behind me, the town stretching ahead. The air smelled crisp, alive like endings and beginnings, all tangled together with every step away from that building. The weight I had carried for decades lifted a little more. No more explaining, no more guilt, no more apologies. As I crossed the parking lot, a gust of wind picked up fallen leaves and sent them swirling around my boots. It was as if the world itself was brushing away the last remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me. The courthouse grew smaller in my rear-view mirror as I pulled onto the main road, windows down, letting the crisp fall air wash through the car like a baptism. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, my heart didn't feel like it was dragging a boulder behind it. I didn't flinch, I didn't speak, I didn't need to. As they stormed out, the officer turned to me and said, quietly, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise outside." The sun was shockingly bright against the cool autumn sky. I stood there for a moment, letting the light soak into my skin. Ordinary things done without looking over my shoulder, without waiting for someone to bark an order, toss a bill my way, or remind me that I owed them for existing. It felt foreign and precious. One morning, sitting at the tiny kitchen table with my laptop open, I stumbled across an ad for a small rental unit downtown. No phone vibrating with guilt-laced voicemails. No text demanding. Apologies I didn't owe no more. Pulling myself apart, trying to stitch a family together that had never really included me. I was free, But freedom, I realized, was quieter than I expected. I spent the next few days at Nora's apartment, moving through the small routines of life, making coffee, folding laundry, walking to the corner store for milk. Nothing fancy, an aging brick building with creaky floors and drafty windows. But it was mine if I wanted it. And for once I did. By noon, I'd signed the lease. I didn't tell anyone except Nora. She smiled, handing me a chipped coffee mug to toast with, to new beginnings, she said. Simply to finally choosing myself. I added the next week's blurred into a soft golden rhythm. I bought secondhand furniture piece by piece. A couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly kitchen table someone had loved before me. I painted the walls pale blue, the color of open skies and deep breaths. At night, I would sit by the single living room window, watching the town lights blink on and off like distant stars, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I realized the silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. One Saturday, while unpacking a final box, I found it tucked away at the bottom, a relic from another life, the tiny plastic cake topper, the one from the birthday that had ended everything. I held it in my palm for a long while. The late afternoon sun glinting off its cheap, bent edge. It didn't hurt to look at it anymore. It didn't feel like a reminder of what I lost. It felt like proof of what I survived. I placed it on a shelf above my desk. A small private trophy, not to honor the people who hurt me, but to honor the girl who didn't let it destroy her. Sometime later, a card slipped under my door, no return address inside a short note.